Hello and you're welcome to the Big Tech Show with me, Adrian Weckler, in association with Square. Square can help with your business needs from menu management and online ordering to payments. Visit square.com for more. Now, in recent months, it's emerged that a syndicate of Silicon Valley billionaires, including Ireland's Patrick and John Collison, have bought 55,000 acres of farmland in California with the purpose of starting a new city from scratch. They call it California Forever. Is this a dystopian new citadel where tech millionaires will make all the rules? Or is it a fresh new start and a new way of thinking about the housing crisis? Well, I'm delighted to be joined from San Francisco by J.K. Dineen, the housing reporter at the San Francisco Chronicle. J.K., you're very welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Adrian.
And J.K., you have been on this story for a while. First of all, tell me, where is Solano County, the place where they've bought all these acres?
So it's east of San Francisco, about 40 miles. Most people in the Bay Area sort of pass it on their way to Tahoe, where there's ski resorts and a beautiful lake. And it's in recent years, a lot of people from San Francisco have been forced to, not forced, but have moved there because housing is slightly cheaper, more available, but the commutes are, can be an hour and a half from some parts of the county.
And the acreage that these tech billionaires and millionaires, and I'm looking at the list here, it's not just the Collisons. You're looking at Laureen Powell Jobs, who's the widow of Apple co-founder Steve Jobs, looking at Andreessen Horowitz, Menlo Park venture capital firm, looking at LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman. What they have bought is farmland. There's nothing on it, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So 55,000 acres, just to put it into perspective, is the size of 2 San Franciscos.
Wow.
And so they've bought, it's dry farmland, mostly cattle, wheat, barley, safflower. It's pretty good soil in that it holds water well, but it's dry. You're not going to be growing tomatoes or pistachio nuts or avocados.
You might by the time the tech millionaires have their way with it. But explain to me, as much as we know, what is the general idea here? What's the basic thesis behind, as so far as we know, what they want to do?
Well, they throw around a lot of kind of urbanist buzzwords like walkability and jobs, housing balance, and public transportation, and I mean, but it's just the details are scant. The renderings that they've released on their website are AI generated and are just look like cartoons, basically.
Do you know what? I saw some of these renderings. It shows you what appears to be a kind of a Tuscan Italian landscape mixed with kind of upper class East Coast Connecticut style town centers.
Yeah, it's very bizarre, and the renderings are just kind of poor quality. If you look at it closely, like there's a girl on a bicycle that doesn't have a left foot. I mean, there's just like a lot of details kind of missing, and then it shows. You have no idea from the renderings. What are people going to do for a living? Where are they going to work? How are they going to get around? There's no cars in any of the renderings. Everybody's on bicycle. There's a lot of people in kayaks and boats out in the Sacramento River. So it seems like maybe they're planning on having an economy based on fishing. It's kind of hard to tell.
I mean, California Forever, the organization, says that it hasn't yet put forward any detailed plans yet. But I'm wondering, do we have any idea from the coverage that this has gotten so far about, let's call it the ethos or the lifestyle objectives of those planning it from a community perspective?
I would say that they are just trying to take the kind of new urbanist 15-minute city idea, basically a place where you can walk to the grocery store, walk to restaurants, walk to work, and kind of put that out in the middle of nowhere. Um,
Hmm.
it, it's really they're talking about solar power, so they're talking about planting over 1 million olive trees. So there'd be some agriculture, clean energy. I don't know where they would get their water from. It's hard to figure out how people would get around because there's one road that they're the eastern part of Solano County, which
Hmm.
is a very long way from Tipperary. But
Well, it's over this side of the Atlantic. We hear about projects like this in the States, and we're kind of intrigued because anything can happen in America, right? I mean, Las Vegas was the small, sleepy town that bloomed in the desert, city of a thousand lights. But I'm also conscious that the US is the land of gated communities. And I'm assuming, for example, that this new city would be a democracy, that it would have a mayor or elected officials, and that, or would it? Maybe this would be some giant kind of ultra planned area where people who wanted to move there, like a co op, maybe they'd be vetted. Is that
I
dystopian
don't think.
idea?
Yeah, that would be the thing that scares everybody, like the Margaret Atwood dystopian novel
Hmm.
version of California Forever. Um, ah, so far the organization has not done a very good job at currying favor with elected officials and politicians. They've managed to alienate pretty much everybody. They are going to need, whether or not they want to ultimately have a different form of government remains to be seen. But they're going to need the approval of the current government if they want to see this happen. They need to. So in Solano County, there are 7 cities, and the rest of the and they have something called the Organized Growth Initiative, which basically says that all urban development, housing, office space, commercial, retail has to happen in the 7 cities that exist in the county, and
Hmm.
not in unincorporated, ag land, which makes up the remainder of Solano County.
Hmm.
And so all of the land they're buying is outside of the city limits of Rio Vista and Fairfield and the various municipalities. So they're going to have to get the voters of Solano County to overturn or make an exception to that organized growth initiative.
Hmm.
And that's going to be a heavy lift. It's come to the ballot 4 times, and 4 times the voters have upheld the current rules. They're also going to need a vote from the Solano County Board of Supervisors, um, in order to, and a lot of other agencies, water quality boards, and there's a
This
bunch of.
this starts to sound fairly greasy fairly quickly.
Yeah, it's going to be a really heavy lift. On the other hand, they've already spent $1 billion,
Mm.
and can they just buy the votes they need
Mm.
over the next few years? It's possible.
And
Um,
you gave me a sense of some of the feedback from some constituencies there. Do we know how other ordinary Californians have reacted to this? What has the reaction been to the idea of this sparkling new city being built from nothing?
I think I get a lot of feedback I think I've done 7 stories in the last month. It's really mixed. I do, like you said, California is the golden state. It's the place where people go to reinvent themselves. It's the place where anything's possible. So I think that there's a lot of people who are open minded about this idea. Uh, but then, I mean, so um, the Yes in My Backyard movement
Hmm.
has really become quite strong in San Francisco. So this is basically a political movement that started about 10 years ago. Um, that was a reaction to a lot of NIMBY sort of attitude, which where residents, homeowners opposed opposed housing, and you had all these young tech workers and young families moving into California, and they couldn't buy a house because we weren't building enough housing. And so the YIMBY movement, which the Collisons have, contributed $1 million to in 2018, at the time that was the largest contribution that had been made to any YIMBY organization. That has become a powerful movement. But the thing is, the YIMBYs have always been all about building in existing cities,
Mm.
brownfield development as opposed to greenfield development. Taking obsolete, factory
Hmm.
properties, contaminated sites, and cleaning them up and building housing in a place where there's already train stations and retail and all the stuff, schools and all the stuff that you need to make a city. And so this is something very different. And so the YIMBY movement itself is divided on this. It'll be interesting to see how that breaks down as time goes forward, and whether the all of the YIMBYs will end up being on board
Mm.
or not.
I mean, it's not the first time that something from scratch has been built in the US. In one of your articles, you cited somebody who was referring to how Philadelphia came about, for example. And essentially that was one particularly rich person who decided he wanted to build, in his view, a beautiful city. I mentioned Las Vegas before. See all sorts of communities pop up in the States. In Florida, they create these giant communities seemingly from scratch, aimed at attracting a new way of living. I just wonder what we will see, what we will end up with, presuming this city gets built. What kind of a place it will be? Will it be somewhere that you'd want to visit, where you'd want to live? Will it be Republican? Will it be Democrat? Will it be none of the above? Do you think it's going to get built?
Um, I think it's going to take over a decade to get it. If it ends up getting approved, it's going to take 10 years.
Okay.
If you look, there are examples of smaller cities that have been built in the last 2 decades in the Bay Area. There's a place called Mountain House, which is in Central Valley, but commutable to the Bay Area, just over the Altamont Pass, from the East Bay part of the Bay Area.
And what kind of people live there?
And so it's a lot of people that have been priced out of the inner Bay Area. I mean, a lot of police officers, firefighters, nurses. Um, but if you look at what the promises made with that new city, which has about 22,000 people living in it, and what ended up happening, at the time they said we're going to have enough jobs that most people in Mountain House can work around there, and I think I read somewhere that out of the 22,000 residents, something like 75 of them work in Mountain House.
Oh, so it's just a commuter's
It's just a
town.
bedroom community, and people have some just epic, horrific commutes
Do you,
into the.
from what you can gather in reporting on this, do you think that the motivations of the founder is a guy called Jan Schromek, who's a former Goldman Sachs trader, and the people who've contributed to it, like the Collisons and the other tech billionaires I've mentioned, do you think that that their vision is one of trying to build something from a good place, or do you think they're looking for a kind of an elite community somewhere that they can create a kind of a Valhalla, a utopia somewhere where that doesn't have the issues that other cities have?
Hard to say. I mean, the idea that it would be some elite community seems far-fetched, given that I don't think that too many people with a lot of resources would choose necessarily to live that far away from, the symphony, the opera, the museums, the restaurants, the high rises in downtown San Francisco, Stanford University, University of California, Berkeley. It's just, so I wonder. I mean, the reason why Stripe gave $1 million to California YIMBY is that they were having trouble recruiting employees, and that's only gotten worse since COVID, where people can work remotely and
Hmm.
live in places with far cheaper housing costs than San Francisco. Look, we've done a terrible job of building housing in California, and the ramifications are many. I mean, we have a big homelessness crisis. We have, we've had companies that have moved to Texas and Florida and other places because it's simply hard our housing costs are double those of many other parts of the country. Um, and so if I were employed, I don't know how many employees Stripe has, but if they've got to be concerned about having places for their kind of mid-level, entry-level um, people in their organization to work. And so I would think that that's at least part of the motivation.
Oh, I see. So they're not in it to make a profit. They're not in it to make a utopian place. They're in it as a kind of a cocktail of motivational factors, including literally somewhere for people to live, people who might even be employed in their companies.
That's my guess. Yeah, I mean, and like it's the whole thing has been shrouded in mystery, and as they've kind of gone public with, which they were forced to do, by the way. One thing that we didn't mention is that there's a Air Force base in Solano County, and they've been buying up a lot of land. It's Travis Air Force Base, the most important Air Force base in the United States, and so uh, they started buying property in 2018, and they've pretty much bought all of the land, the agricultural land around the Air Force Base, which was a source of great consternation for a lot of people because there was all kinds of rumors. Is it the Chinese? Are they people spying on us? Like,
No, it's the Irish.
yes, the Irish. Yeah. Um, and yeah, so they've kind of settled that issue, though. They've said, look, all that space around the Air Force Base is going to be preserved as is, as a buffer between the city that we build and the Air Force Base, and so that I think that assuaged some concerns that the military had anyway.
Mm. I
And
don't
so I
know.
was,
I don't know who I would want to go up against more, the military or the ranchers. I've watched Yellowstone. I know how vicious,
yeah,
vicious they can get. Look, J.K. Deneen, housing reporter at the San Francisco Chronicle. Thank you so much for joining our podcast and explaining what's going on with California. Forever, it's been a pleasure having you, and that is all we have time this week, folks. Thank you very much to Tabitha Monaghan, who produced, to Gav Hennessy on sound, and Conan Doherty on video. I'm Adrian Weckler, and you've been watching or listening to The Big Tech Show in association with Square. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye.